Evening, citizens. Something special for you this evening. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. I don't want to say too much about him before he comes on, but you could say that he's been working at the coalface of what we would probably think was the first of our institutions to be corrupted. So, anyway, over to you, Rob.
Oh, good evening, and thank you for letting me on and giving me the opportunity to impart a bit of information.
Oh, you're
Uh,
most welcome, mate.
yes, right, yeah. Well, there's no big secrets here, really. My name's Rob, and I'm a secondary school teacher. I'm a head of department, teach design technology at a school, quite a large secondary school in Lincolnshire. But a bit of a disclaimer before we start. All these views are my own and in no way representative of the organisation I work for. And yeah, I want to say, because there is a chance that some of my colleagues might see this video. I am going to be critical of various things, but I'm going to be critical of the system more than the people. I would say 90% of my colleagues that I work with are spot on, well-meaning people, doing their best, doing their job, basically, basically good people. I'd also say we've probably got about 5% of bad actors. What maybe politically driven people who are using their sort of their job to forward a bit of activism. And as with any sort of work institution or place, there's a few lazy ones as well, isn't there? So there's probably about another 5% of people who,
Yeah.
in all honesty, aren't working as hard as they could be. But I think that's the case in a lot of places. But yeah, 90% of my colleagues, particularly the ones that are in the classroom day to day, are doing the best, and there is still some excellent teachers in there, and there is yeah, I'm not going to criticize them, shall we say.
That is good to know. Anyway, that is good to know. So,
Yes. Um, right. Yeah, and also, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my colleagues, I can see the demoralisation in my profession at the moment, and whether that's the system or wider society, there definitely is sort of a bit of a nihilistic sort of element in the air at the moment. And I've spoke to people from other professions, and it seems like that's kind of a bit of an attitude that's going around at the moment. And
but there's
um,
general malaise, isn't there?
yeah, that's the word I'm after, malaise. And I think it is dawning on people how much they've been lied to. And I think they're starting to, some of them are just sort of thinking, what's the point? Yeah, there's a definite malaise. Right, but I wanted to kick off, if you'll indulge me, to give you a bit of background information.
I'm just going to let you talk, Rob, and and then if
Yeah, just
I've
sort
got
of,
questions along the way, I'll just interject where I
yes,
can.
please do. Yeah, yeah. And just to kind of explain where I've got to, and how I've got to this point and this way of thinking, which, as I say, is my take on it all. Yeah, I wanted to start with a quote from someone you may know called Bertrand Russell, who's famous philosopher from one of the thinkers of the time in the 1950s. I think some of his ideas are quite Malthusian, but yeah, he famously said in 1951, education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than their schoolmasters would have wished. Um, so I think that kind of tells us there was goes back a long time where people have used education as or thought of education as a tool of social engineering.
As long
And
as we
then
do.
yeah, And then of course in the late 60s, you've got Gamsky and I can never pronounce his surname. Is it Dachusky? Who they're famous for their they're revolutionary Marxists, and they started the idea of the long march through the institutions. So they realised that they were never going to be able to get elected. So they were going to seek power and influence through infiltrating the institutions, and their plan was a 50-year plan. So that was late 60s. So we're there now, and I would argue they've been pretty successful in their their attempts at that. Yeah. So that's a bit of a background, and then so I started teaching in 2005 was the year I started teaching. So I kind of fell into the profession. It wasn't really what I planned on doing. I went to university. I did engineering, and as a lot of people did at that time, I delayed going into work for a few years because I got a backpack and went off traveling around the world. I did work in Australia and I did work in America, and I worked in the summer camps in America doing football coaching and BMX coaching, and
living the life.
and I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed working with children. So I came back. Engineering was on its knees. There wasn't many jobs around, and I just took a teaching job, really. I went into teacher training then and did it kind of by accident. So that's how I ended up doing it. I think it's relevant that my dad's a small farmer, so I grew up on a farm. My uncle's a builder. So I grew up in that sort of environment, not a lot of bullshit, and you sort of
honest stuff, isn't it?
You get on with it and you work hard, yeah. So yeah, so that's me. And then right, so started teaching in 2005. Just basically got on with it. I mean, it is a challenging job. When you see a good teacher in action, you really do see the skill set that they have is huge. Yeah, so those first few years, I'm kind of learning my craft. You don't think any further than your own classroom. You're just dealing with what you've got there and then, and learning how to manage children. The behaviour management was a big thing. Obviously, I started in some quite challenging schools. Yeah, you've got to learn how to handle yourself, and you're still in those early days learning your subject. I mean, now I know it inside out, but there's still bits you're unsure on at that time. So yeah, those early years getting into it, learned a lot. And I would say it wasn't till about 2015 I just started to feel like some things aren't good here. Something's not right.
Can you remember the first things that you?
Well, it was really the decision making that was happening at higher levels and coming down. A lot of it just didn't make any sense. Sort of just where money was being spent, where some of the staffing decisions and appointments and the restructurings, and also the way they started to handle, excuse me, students in terms of behaviour. I don't think I can put my finger on one specific thing, but things didn't seem right, and we were at that point getting well into what I'm going to explain in a minute is the multi-academy trust system. But obviously I didn't realise that at that time. I just thought something wasn't quite right. And at the same time, as well as trying to improve my teaching, I started to get into psychology. it was through my interest in sport, really. I was a cricket captain at the time, and I read books like Mike Brearley's The Art of Captaincy, and
Oh, that one. Yeah.
although he's an Aussie, I read Steve Waugh's book because I did admire him as a tough captain,
Yeah.
and I thought I would sort of glean some hints how to sort of handle kids better from that. So handling different characters and different types of people. And that kind of sparked an interest in psychology. So I went on and read a few psychology books, and I stumbled across at that time this document,
Mm.
which I think that's the government's Mindspace document.
I'll
Uh,
put this in the description now.
Yes, yeah, and I've sent you an image you can display as well if you. And when I read it, it made me bloody mad because I would advise anyone to have a look at it as well. It it basically openly says about manipulating people to get them to agree to policy.
Really,
Um,
really.
and yeah, and if there's quite a bit to it, but when you read through it, it says how they use certain techniques to influence people's decision making, and so the messenger is a key element. So where the information comes from,
Mm.
um, and challenging norms, new normals, etc. Um,
This is
playing
sounding worryingly familiar, actually.
Yeah, playing on people's egos. Now, obviously, in the light of what we now know now, but at the time it annoyed me because I'm thinking it's not their place to start manipulating us, and I was a bit annoyed about it. But obviously, you can't do anything about it. But it's one of those things that once you know it, you start to see it in
Mm.
various places.
Yeah.
And I could start to see some of this manipulation in education, and I could see how they were handling staff and how certain things were being manipulated to get people to agree to things they maybe wouldn't have agreed to before. And it was quite subtle then, but you could see it. And
Did you get the feeling that any of your colleagues had the same misgivings?
um,
Or was it a private thing for initially, I
at
suppose?
that time, it was yeah. I don't think many did actually. Not at that time. So yeah, um, that really sort of sparked me to look into things a bit deeper, and to look into the system that I was working in, because trying to make sense of it basically. I think I've sent you a picture of I've done what I've called the education blob. Now this is my construct, so it's my ideas, so it's not necessarily completely factual, but it gives you an idea, I think, of. I mean, you'll have heard the education blob referred to before, I would imagine, and it is just a massive beast, um, and I could kind of start to see how it was being captured. So just to rewind a little bit. So in 2002, our friend Tony Blair
Oh,
um,
oh man.
opened the first academy school. Um, but it wasn't until 2006 when he got his Academies Act through. That act allowed schools or academies or federations, as they were often called, then to start collectivizing together. So you could get two schools joined together or three schools joined together, and they would start working together.
What was the stated reason for this?
Well, prior to that, we had the schools were controlled by the local authorities, whoever that was at the time. Now, don't get me wrong, that system wasn't great. there was a lot of problems with that system, and it was run down. So again, at that time, a lot of school buildings were in a state, and yeah, I mean, I think Tony Blair came to power, didn't he? One of his main things was education, education, education,
I
and
remember.
they suddenly made a lot of money available for education, but you had to be an academy to get it. um,
Right.
so all these schools started becoming academies. A lot of them got money to have new buildings, new facilities, etc. And it was much needed at the time. And I'd actually say at that time, when the academy systems were coming in, they started to run schools a bit more like a business, and it did shake things up. And some of it was for the better, because there was a lot of dead wood in the system at the time, and they did actually sort a lot of that out, and they cleared out some of the underperforming teachers. So in the early days, it wasn't a bad thing, but it was this collectivization of schools. So they started getting in together as two, as three, and they got bigger and bigger. And what we've got now is we've got multi-academy trusts. A small one's probably got 10 schools in its trust, and then you've got some going up to 30 schools. So you've now got a massive organization, and you've got layers and layers and layers of management, a lot before you get near a classroom. You've got CEOs on 200 grand a year plus. So once you get to that situation, the dynamics change.
Yeah.
and
I bet.
the organizational culture changes as well. And that's quite obvious now. I mean, I have referred to it as kind of stripping the soul out of it. Now, I wouldn't say completely, because there's still, as I say, a lot of good people on the ground doing good things. It's not all bad on the ground, but it certainly is. Yeah, some of the humanity's gone out of it, definitely, because of the amount of people within a multi-academy trust. You could say we're a number.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
applies to the staff as well. So that system has evolved since 2002 initially, and then you've got around education, you've got a mass of, when you look into it, it's unbelievable how many think tanks and NGOs are all surrounding education, and they're all pushing their little agendas in, and yeah, it's.
So do you feel that? Did you feel as this stuff started to come in? Did you feel a sort of any kind of loss of control of things?
Yes, yeah. Well, as a head of department, especially in recent years, there's been a lot of sort of they're trying to a lot of talk about alignment. So they want to align everybody's curriculums, so that we're all teaching the same across all the schools. Whereas before, schools in different towns and different areas would have different takes on things and different slants on things, so it wouldn't all be the same. But yeah, it's that homogenization of everything. So, and with that, there is a loss of control. But having said that, once that classroom door shuts and you're in there with those kids, it is your domain. So you still do have a lot of influence on there. But I suppose you do if you like me, who tends to do their own thing anyway. But yeah.
Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, and it's that you can kind of realize that the whole thing was being captured just slowly. And again, if you look, hopefully you'll be able to show this blob that I've done. But again, if you look around government, obviously you've got the teaching unions are influencing, and then how government sort of issues policies through Ofsted and Ofqual. I mean, we haven't got time to go into it all, but all these think tanks that have got inputs into what's going on. The chosen think tank of the government is the Education Endowment Foundation. So if you take a look at the Education Endowment Foundation, the chairman is Peter Lample. He's a former globalist investment banker.
Yeah.
And the CEO is Professor Becky Francis, who used to be at UCL, University College London, and she specialises in social identities, race, gender, and class.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, you can look into all of those think tanks, and you find the same sort of people with the same backgrounds. So you can see where it's all being steered. I like to use that word a lot. I think there's a lot of steering going on, and a lot of we've been pushed in a direction that probably a lot of us wouldn't have thought a long time ago, but it's happened gradually. Yeah, and of course, what is true though is you can criticise the unions, you can criticise the government and the exam boards. Yeah, you can criticise the government all day because it's the fucking Tories, isn't it? It's the fucking Tories.
Oh, yeah.
Which it is to a certain extent. Yeah, I'm not on their side by any stretch, but
Well, Labour are also the Tories, aren't
and
they?
they're definitely complicit, but it's not going to be any better with the other lot. And you can criticise, you can openly criticise the unions. It's not a problem. But what I notice, if you go above that and start criticising the layers above that, that's when the name calling starts. So straight away, it's conspiracy theorist, far right,
Far right.
far
Right.
right.
Obviously.
I haven't been called anti-Semite yet, but it's probably coming. Yeah. Yeah, so nobody wants to look above there, and when you do, all roads lead to one place. They do, and that place is Agenda 2030. And again, I hope you can show that picture at this point in time. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals for Agenda 2030, you'll see on there number 11 is sustainable cities and communities. So that's very relevant at the moment. 15-minute cities, low traffic neighbourhoods. You can follow the documentation all the way to those sustainable development goals. And of course, number 4, sustainable goal number 4 is quality education. Now, I'm sure you know this, but when you look at this document and this stuff, and it's all there on the internet, it all sounds lovely when you read the first page and all the goals and targets. And who wouldn't want quality education for everybody?
Who wouldn't want a low traffic neighbourhood?
How could you be against that? But the devil's in the detail. Once you start reading the detail, you can just see that the language, the way the ideas that have been pushed, they're the same ideas that have come down to government policy. They've been, and I see them from guidance documents from the government, like this one. The case for a fully trust-led system, stuff you get sent through from think tanks and from the Education Endowment. I've forgotten the name of it now. Education Endowment Foundation. It's all the same language. It's all the same words, and it's obviously come from there.
All have been written by the same team with loads of different names, perhaps.
Quite possibly, yes. Yeah. And I think very, very few people know about this. I really do. Still, And I think very few people know that. Again, hopefully you'll be able to show this, but
Yeah, I'll show all these. Well,
it's on the government website. It's implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. The UK is committed to delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. The most effective way to do this is by ensuring that the goals are fully embedded in planning activity at each government department. The most effective mechanism for coordinating implementation is the departmental planning process. So in my case, it would be the Department of Education. So you can see where this stuff has come from. I'd just like to shout out actually at the moment to thank Mark Windows, because I discovered him a few years ago, and a lady called Sandy Adams. They alerted me to this Sustainable Development Goals. That's what got me looking at it first, and then I found the links to education, and so I think both of them have done some good work on this, and it probably can explain it much better than I can. But yeah, and the whole of these Sustainable Development Goals revolve around this idea of communitarianism, and so what communitarianism, I'm sure you know what it is. My understanding of it is that it's basically communism rebranded with a bit of a dose of corporatism, i.e. fascism mixed in, and some technocracy, because we've now got the technology to be able to implement some of this stuff in a different
the Holy Trinity,
so, So it's lovely stuff, really, isn't it? But it's all presented very nicely. Yeah, and in terms of political parties, I've not heard any major politician or any political party ever talk about Sustainable Development Goals, or I've never seen it criticised on any mainstream media. I think it may have been mentioned once or twice on something like GB News, but it's certainly not out there in the public domain, and I think most people don't know that we've signed up and agreed to implement all these goals, and I certainly don't think anybody voted for that, whatever side of the fence they sit. So, but yeah, that is there. Actually, I tell you like that. Is it David Curtin, Heritage Party?
Heritage Party, yeah.
He's the only one that's called it out and said that he would reject it, Agenda 2050. Right. So.
Yes, that's right.
To my knowledge, there may be others, but to my knowledge, that's the one. So yeah, going back to aim goal 4 of the Agenda 2030. So quality education. I'll just read what I mean. There's quite a lot of detail to it, but I'll read one of the targets in it. So. By 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, and gender equality. Promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. Just click on that a second. So I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but it basically shows this sustainable.
It's meant to turn you off, isn't it? It's meant to turn you off, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's designed for people to just read it. But yeah, when you pick through it, and that statement basically manifests its way in 3 ways, in my view, in the classroom. So you've got all the stuff about equality and diversity. That's a foot in the door for the cultural Marxists. That really is a sort of green flag for them to go. So that's where all this cultural Marxism's come in. And of course, the Marxists love all this communitarian stuff, don't they? It's right up their street. So that comes in, and then of course we've got the sustainable development, which is everywhere now across subjects, and of course the carbon caused climate change lie, which is being pushed. And then there's a dumbing down bit as well, but I'll come to that in a moment. But yeah, so the cultural Marxism it's in schools, it's coming in the critical race theory, gender theory. There's a lot of stuff about misogyny now, and they're even pushing stuff like polyamory. I think I've said it right. If you know what that is. And it's just quite insidious. And I think a lot of staff are being steered to deliver this stuff, and I know they're uncomfortable with it. I know they're thinking it's not quite right, but it's all kind of presented. If you don't like it or you speak out against it, you're a bad person. So yeah, I think there's a lot of fear to challenge it, but I know through speaking to other staff, quite a lot are not comfortable with some of this stuff that's coming in. Yeah, I just want to read a bit more from UNESCO, which is the UN's education and cultural sort of arm. There's a lady who works there, Director of Education, Jo Bourne. She said this when talking about population control. Better educated societies, and particularly better educated girls, make better health decisions and have fewer babies. UNESCO then goes on to say in some of its documentation, now I actually think this is aimed, obviously it's worldwide, I think it's aimed at Africa, this, but it kind of gives you a taste of their way of thinking. So it says, increases in population and resource use are thought to jeopardize a sustainable future, and education is linked to both fertility rate and resource consumption. Educating females reduces fertility rates and therefore population growth. By reducing fertility rates and the threat of overpopulation, a country also facilitates progress towards sustainability. The opposite is true for the relationship between education and resource use. Generally, more highly educated people who have higher incomes consume more resources than poorly educated people who tend to have lower incomes. In this case, more education increases the threat to sustainability. Now, what I take from that is they want to educate people, but only to a certain level.
Not too much.
Not too much, yeah. So they want to educate people smart enough to not have too many babies, but not well enough to start asking some serious questions of their superiors. And didn't George Carling say something?
Yeah. Just dumb enough to run the machines.
Yes.
Yeah. Smart enough to run the machines.
But this is out there. This is in black and white on their websites. They don't hide this stuff. It's there if you want to find it. So that just gives you an idea of the thinking. And that takes me to the dumbing down bit. Now, as I say, I think those statements are aimed at third world education in third world countries, but I think it does apply to us as well, because I've also noticed, and I noticed this back in 2015, that the GCSE and A levels, they started to get watered down, quite heavily watered down in two ways, really. Yeah, first of all, just the content of the exams and exam questions, they weren't as challenging. So going back 10, 20 years, some of the questions were quite abstract, quite challenging questions, particularly at A level. So you get stuff like, in my subject DT, you get stuff like uh, trying to think. Discuss the impact of automation on UK manufacturing. That'd be it. And you'd have to write an essay, 20 marks.
That's pretty open-ended, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, very open. And you had to think, and you had to know your stuff. To construct an essay to answer that question in a sensible way, you really had to think. Whereas now, that sort of question will be, explain the advantages and disadvantages of automation. And what a student will do, and what a teacher like me will have done, I will have prepared them for that, because in the textbook there's a table and it says advantages of automation, disadvantages.
Right,
They would learn that, remember that, and they would trot it off. So there's not much critical thinking there. Also, as a teacher, and I've done it, you look back through past papers and you start to see patterns. And in more recent times, I mean, I could nearly predict the questions that are coming every year. They're on 2 or 3 year cycles. So you can predict the questions that are coming. So you can prepare the kids for it. If they listen and do what you ask them to do, they'll be fine. They'll do all right. Which is good for them. It gets them a result, gets them to go to the next step of their life, whatever it might be. But it's not education, is it? It's not critical thinking. It's just jumping through hoops. Yeah. So we're basically rewarding compliance. And yes, they are rewarded for working hard, and so they should be, and listening. But that critical element bit is gone. That critical thinking is gone. I want to mention a guy called Nigel Watson. I'm going to give you a couple of links. He's a retired economics teacher, and he's done a couple of videos on the same sort of thing. I think he explains it better than I can. So if I send you the links, if you could put them on there, I think if anyone's interested, he's done a very good explanation on that as an economics teacher. So another thing they've done, which has assisted with the sort of dumbing down, is they've debased the qualifications, GCSE and A level. So how they've done that is year on year they've adjusted the grade boundaries, and it's usually down. So what the government's done, so they released documents like this espousing how successful multi-academy trusts are, and in that they cite year-on-year rises in exam results as their evidence for it. You probably noticed every end of August, September on the news, you have all the exam results day. It's a big news day, isn't it? They're outside of schools, and most years they say, well, there's been a 2% rise in grades, and more students than ever are getting the grades and going to university. And so we've had that pattern going on, and then the politicians come on and say what a marvellous job they're doing, and how wonderful multi-academy trusts are because the exam results are going up. It's all smoke and mirrors, because so when I started, the GCSEs grades was A to G, and then they adjusted the grade. They kept dropping the grade boundaries down, and they added in an A star because they had nowhere to go, so they had to add in another grade at the top. And then they continued doing that. It's a bit like printing money, really. And then they added an A star in some subjects. And then our friend Mr. Gove came in and probably realised they couldn't debase those grades anymore. They needed to revamp it, and so they revamped the GCSEs. There was all the new sort of syllabuses came in and a new grading system. So it's now 9 to 1. So
Right. So
we're
nine's
only
high.
about 3 years into that, I think, 3 or 4 years into that. So they've not managed to debase that yet, but it's happening. It's the same trick. It's just different. Yeah.
It does sound like something there is, you know.
And of course, with the A levels, again, I've noticed this because I've taught A level quite a long time. When I started teaching A level, if you got 50%, that you basically scraped an E grade. You got 50%. And again, A levels are used to be good qualifications. They meant something. Advanced level, if you got an A level, decent A level, especially in maths, physics, English, it meant something because they were hard and they're supposed to be hard because it's advanced. But they've debased that as well. They've dropped the grade boundaries. So last year, in my subject, if you got 55%, you got a grade B. So you can see how it's shifted. But again, most of the public don't know that. They just get the
Although
news.
they do suspect it. They do suspect it.
I think they do suspect it. Yeah.
So most of what you've been telling me is stuff that we all kind of think has been going on, but we're not. We're all a bit vague about it.
Yeah.
You know?
And you can kind of see it. I hate to speak in these terms, but in society, the dumbing down, when you look around people, the state of a lot of people are in a state of what I call arrested development. They're just
they're all on Twitter, and the spelling is worse. Yeah.
I mean, I love sport, so I'm not. But as long as they've got their football, they can go to the pub, they can go on holiday, they're happy. And again, I've really noticed it in the last few years when I go to functions and things, and I'm in conversations with people, and they're talking about holidays and Love Island and things, and I just think, is this it? um, and yeah, I don't want to talk down on other people, but yeah, I think there is an element of that. Bread and circuses, isn't it? Keep them distracted, and so they're not looking at Agenda 2030.
Well, exactly.
So yeah, and that's gone on, and I see it in my profession as well. And again, to speak about some of my colleagues, they've gone to primary school, they've then gone to secondary school, they've then gone to uni, and to study education, and then have come back to school. So they've basically never left the school system. And you can see that kind of groupthink is there with them, and they've not all of them, I may say, but that has happened, yeah. So and that doesn't help, and I think that is helping them propagate this carbon cause climate change lie, which is again one of the three things I've said. So cultural Marxism, the sustainable development, and the dumbing down. So the sustainable development stuff is now, there's a lot of it in my subject, obviously geography, science, and it's all presented as if the science is settled. So
that's, isn't it?
carbon is definitely causing climate change, and the educational textbooks say that.
And it's our fault. Yeah.
That it's our fault, yes, yeah, that it's our fault, people's fault. So that message is being pushed out to students and going unchallenged. And I think a lot of my colleagues believe it. I think they've got genuine intentions with it. I think they believe it, that it's true. And yeah, I'm deeply uncomfortable with that because I feel like I'm in a system that's propagating one of the biggest lies in history.
Mm.
And I mean, I do have to teach it as part of my subject, but I'm passionate about being impartial in the classroom and in front of students. So I will say, right, there's this group of scientists say this.
Mm.
Greenhouse effect is causing global warming. But I also say there's this group of scientists that say there is climate change, but it's not caused by carbon. It's the sun that's doing it, and slight
So
changes in the Earth's axis and slight changes in the orbit of the sun. So, and then I say to them, there's your information. It's up to you to decide what you think is right. So I try and present it in that way. But
do you
uh,
get any sort of official pushback from presenting that other side then?
um, not really, because I suppose most of the time they don't know. Because, like I say, once that classroom door shuts,
Yeah.
um, what you're delivering is up to you, really. Obviously, we have observations and people drop in, and we have a basic curriculum and a lesson planning to sort of stick to. But yeah, it's your take on it, really.
Well, I suppose that you can't.
Uh,
It would be difficult to criticise that, wouldn't it? That you're offering two sides of this,
I
two
think
sides.
so. Yes, yeah, yeah. I think some people might say, "Oh, well, it's a much smaller number of scientists that um,
Yeah.
say that it's the sun as opposed to the ones that say it's carbon," which is not actually true either. But um, that's what the BBC says. Um,
Exactly.
um, so yeah, that lie is being propagated and that it is being hammered home, and of course we're from a generation more skeptical. We've had backgrounds that's made us question stuff a bit more. Um, like I say, once looking into psychology was a like a big thing for me, because once you see it and you see the templates they use to implement this stuff, you can't unsee it. You just spot it straight away. Um,
Did
um,
you did you did you sort of notice the SAGE, the nudge unit, and everything? Did you notice that sooner than other people? Do you think because of your
uh,
interest?
yes, yeah. That night, Boris Johnson came on the
Yeah,
screen, deadly serious, wasn't it?
we
And
must
said,
stay home. Yes, yeah,
I
yeah,
thought, hello,
yeah.
hello, here we go. This is it. Um, I mean, you didn't know what was going to pan out after that, but I thought, oh, they're pulling one on us here, yeah.
Well, it's
Um,
funny because I mean, you're ahead of
um,
me because I didn't know what to think. I was deeply queasy about the whole thing as soon as he came on, but I was thinking,
yeah,
then know anything, did we? Us
yeah.
as members of the public, we didn't know anything, did we?
Yeah.
It would have
No,
been just
no. I mean, I wasn't sure. I had a few doubts, but I did smell a rat big time on that.
yeah,
And it's from reading this all those years ago, reading
yeah,
this. Sorry, not the wrong one. From reading that MySpace, I
yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and I'm sure they've got more advanced techniques than that they're using now. But yeah. So, to any parents that are watching or grandparents that are watching, um, solutions to this. Um,
Look,
because
we need some solutions. We need
uh,
some solutions. Enough of the enough of the psychological hammer blow.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I could talk about the cultural Marxism stuff and go on about. You know all about that, don't you? What's going on, and your viewers will know about that. Um, well, actually, one question about the culture. It's classic divide and rule, isn't it? So this cultural Marxism stuff that's being propagated again in schools, um, yeah, it's typical Marxist divide and rule. It's another thing. Once you know it and you see it, you can see it for what it is. And yeah, it you see it sort of follow waves of media narratives. So obviously the George Floyd thing, we had all
yeah.
the the critical race theory followed that in schools. We've had the trans stuff more recently, and then they kind of that run its course a bit. Excuse me, and it's on misogyny now is a big thing. So let's get men and women to fall out with each other. And of course, in the news, suddenly all these stories about misogyny start popping up at the same time, and it's just it's almost like it's planned. But yeah,
Yes.
so yeah, solutions for parents, grandparents. I would say there's a lot of talk at the moment about homeschooling. I think that is an option if you are able to do it. I'm pretty sure it's very difficult to do, but I would say if you are able to do it and you've got the resources at home and the time, it's something you should seriously look at.
Something coming from a teacher.
Yes, it's something I never thought I would say. However, I still think there are benefits to stay in the system as long as you know it and understand it for what it is. I think a lot of us now that have, especially over the last 3 years, that are, I don't like this term, but are waking up to what's going on. We've kind of got one foot in each camp. We're still operating in the old systems and trying to transition into some new systems. But yeah, and obviously it's not everybody's able to homeschool because it's if you both work and yeah, certain situations dictate that you can't homeschool. So I would say your option there is to opt out of PSHE, which you can do. Specifically,
PSHE, which is
personal social health education, yes.
right.
And specifically the sex education part of it. You can opt out of that. And
Okay.
that's where a lot of this cultural Marxism ideas are being filtered in through that route.
Does
So
that come
as
in? Does
parents,
it come in a particular subject, or is it?
well,
If
this is
it's
it.
across
It
all
should
disciplines,
be.
it's difficult to exclude yourself from it.
It
It's
is.
difficult to
It
exclude
is.
your
And
child from it.
it should be a standalone thing.
Right.
But how schools are implementing it, and it will be slightly different in different schools. Some schools will have a whole day off timetable where they do PSHE lessons all day. They'll have a special timetable for that day. Some schools will do it in tutor time in the morning. So it'll be drip fed, maybe not every day, but every so often there'll be some sort of PSHE thing comes through. Yeah, it is being filtered into curriculums. And I was in a meeting earlier on this last year, and I heard a member of staff say, we want to infiltrate PSHE into all curriculums. That was the words that we used. So they're trying to mix it in, but if you can untether yourself from that as much as possible, and you do have the right as parents to tell the school that you want your child to not be in PSHE lessons, specifically the sex ones, the sex education ones, and they have to oblige with that. They have to remove. Very, very few, from what I know and seen, very, very few do that at the moment. And I think if more did it, like my school's over 1,000 kids, I think you can count on one hand the amount of kids that don't do PSHE.
Really, that's interesting.
And again, I don't think parents are aware of what's going on, and I don't think they're aware that they can opt out. So can you remember that rape culture pyramid that
Yes. Yeah.
that has been used by some teachers when talking about rape? So I mean, it's whether you can show it on the screen at this moment. It's basically got an assertion that laddish boys will be boys behaviour, puts you on a pathway to being a rapist,
Yeah.
which
Right. Yeah.
again is not true, because I would say I was a lad at school and
Yes. Yeah.
I engaged in some inappropriate behaviour, used some inappropriate language, and I like to think I've turned out to be a decent person, and I like to think I treat women with respect and always have done. And I know a lot of my friends would say the same thing. I showed that pyramid to quite a few of my friends from different walks of life, and they were pretty shocked, actually. Pretty
Oh,
shocked. They were like, "This is being pushed in schools." Yeah, yeah,
I think this is half the problem, is that
yeah,
most people don't know what's going on. And also, it's as in so many things in society, when you look at something, you don't want to believe it's true.
yes,
If you believe it's true, then you have to do something.
yes,
If you don't believe it's true, you can blackmail yourself that
yeah,
it's not happening, and so
yeah,
therefore you don't have to do anything.
yeah,
But that's this is the thing. I mean,
yeah,
my kids are in their well into their 20s now, late 20s now. So this is not an issue for me. But
yeah,
for many of my viewers, that won't be the case.
yeah,
So it's good to have some solutions. So
yeah.
yeah,
So
so carry on. What?
if
Yeah.
parents can opt out, and if more parents opt out, say we got to like, even if it's only like 10% of kids opting out, that puts the ball in the school's court, because they've got to deal with that. And it will register that they can't mix it into all curriculums then, because we've got all those kids that have opted out of it. So we've got to keep it separate, and those that want to hear that can hear it, and those that don't. And again, just in my conversations with other parents and friends of mine, when you ask them what do you want from your secondary schools, what do you want, and they basically say, we want them to teach the subjects that they've chosen to do really well, teach them expertly. We want to teach them independent skills, critical thinking, and that's it, basically. They don't want all the other stuff. And obviously teach them to behave themselves and polite manners, etc., which is important, of course. Yeah, they don't. Nobody wants this stuff. Only a very, very narrow band. And like I say, that 5% of Marxist activists that are operating in schools, they've got far too much influence, far too much, and they're dictating what's going on. So, I think some voices from the other side need to start speaking out. And
Well, removing your child from those
yeah,
is quite a powerful weapon, really.
yes, yeah.
I mean, do you have sort of parent-teacher evenings where you can say this to parents and stuff?
Well, they do. I mean, multi-academy trusts do have governing boards, and there will be some parent governors on there, and there'll be a teacher governor on there as well. But again, this is the thing with you've got a huge organisation now, a big multi-academy trust. The governors don't have the influence that they used to have years ago. And I do think to a certain extent they get the wool pulled over their eyes as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, parents, you've just got to let them know, yeah, and find out who your kid's form tutor is and tell them, I don't want my child hearing this stuff. Stick to teaching them maths and English, and yeah,
Well, it's good to know that there is a mechanism to
yeah,
get. It's good to know that.
yes, yeah, yeah. So use it, please, yeah.
Yeah.
And your viewers on here, tell your friends as well that they can do this. They've got to do it. Another solution is talk to your kids about what's going on in school. Now, I know it's hard to get information out of teenagers, isn't it? Very difficult. But you need to arm them with a bullshit detector. They need to have one, because they're going to get given a lot of information in school which is bullshit, and they need to be able to recognize it. So as a parent, around the dinner table, general conversation, just I know I'm talking to the converted with your audience, aren't I? But yeah, that they need to know that they're going to hear some nonsense, and that they can reject it and they can challenge it, and it's the same
One of
thing
the,
with this basic psychology stuff. Once
yeah,
you know it, that's it. There's no going back. Once you can see this stuff, there's no going back. You can see it for what it is straight away, and it's the same with kids.
yeah.
Um,
I think one of the things about this, about with kids and stuff, is that you have to sort. I mean, I wonder how many people do this, but it's quite obvious that the person that is most concerned about a child is their parent.
Parent, yeah, yeah,
It's only the parent that loves
yeah,
them. The teacher may be a very good teacher, maybe a
yeah,
teacher like you, but
yeah,
you'll do your job and you'll do it the best of your ability.
yeah,
But you're not their parent,
yeah.
and the parent is the person that is the primary person that is responsible for
Absolutely,
children.
absolutely.
And one of the things I think people ought to be asking their kids is that who cares about you most? Is it your teacher or is it me? And
Yeah,
I think people don't say this,
yeah,
and they I think sometimes as well. Sometimes teenagers can be quite strident as well,
yeah,
and they'll regurgitate something. It's happened to me. I remember it's happened to me. Regurgitate something over the dinner table that completely floors you because well, where did that come from?
yeah.
Sometimes it's coming
PSHE lesson.
exactly, exactly. And you sort of and you're kind of you're put on the back foot with that.
Yeah,
But I think maybe you need to anchor yourself in some real proper truths. And the truth
yeah,
is that I'm your dad or I'm your mum, and I love you, and I'm most concerned about you.
yeah,
I'm more concerned about you than people at school. No matter how good a teachers they are, they're not
yeah,
concerned about you the way I am. So who are you going to listen to?
yeah.
Who are you going to listen to? You're going to listen to me, or you're going to listen to them? Um,
Yeah, I think you've hit upon a shift. I mean, going back to all those think tanks and that surround education and all those bodies that support teaching. Um, I've met a lot of the people that work in those organisations, and they are breathtakingly arrogant that they know best.
yeah,
And um, yeah, there's
yeah.
you
We
know
know
what I
you,
mean, yeah.
we know the type.
And
You
it's
get them in local government, you get them, you get them anywhere, don't you?
yeah, and it's a control thing, isn't it? And again, there's libertarians like us who are probably the other end. But yeah, there are these long marchers that have got themselves into quite influential positions, and they are exerting their control. And yeah, and I've been there, I've sat in meetings, I've listened to them talk, and the way they talk, uh, as if they know better for the child than the parents, which
Yeah,
is against everything I stand for. And we've got to remember these are our schools.
yeah.
We pay for them. Me,
Well,
me as a teacher, I work for you as parents. So it's got
there
to
you
be
go.
what you, as parents, what you want, and that's why you've got to tell them what you want, because they're our schools. um, yeah.
So more solutions, you were saying. Did you have any others?
Well, yeah, there was sort of, yeah. So the second solution was operating in the system, but knowing it for what it is, because I still think there are benefits. And as I said before, that there are still loads of really good teachers in the system, some really well-meaning people, and you still do have the benefits of being in a school environment. You're mixing with your own age group, peer groups, you're mixing with lots of different types of people. If you're a sports person, my school's particularly good at sports, performing arts as well. Again, I'd say my school is good in those areas. I wouldn't fault it in those areas. So there's all those benefits as well. But yeah, it is just these certain curriculum areas that that I think are a problem, and they need calling out, and that's kind of why I'm on here, trying to get the information out to help people. And yeah, and like I say, that let them know that's your option, and give your kid a bullshit detector. They need one. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, and so yeah, that's it really. Have you got any?
Well, yeah, that's. I mean, it's mostly
Quiz
not.
me about some other stuff.
Yeah, I thought I'd let you talk, Rob, because
Yeah,
this you're sort of immersed in this, so it's good for you to spread it around to people like us, so that we can get a bit of a handle on it. But it's I mean, I take my hat off to you. You've been, you're in the belly of the beast here with all this sort of stuff. I mean, what's the what are the teaching unions like in all this? Are they all just reconstructed Marxists as well? I mean, this is my suspicion, but I
yeah.
wondered if that's the case.
Well, you see, I'm conflicted on this because I I absolutely think we need unions, and I'll always defend people's right to withhold their labour. Um, but yeah, I think the unions, particularly the teaching unions, have been completely infiltrated by these Marxist revolutionaries because of all the battles. They seem to choose the wrong battles. Um, I mean, yeah, if the union said that um, we're going to go on strike because we're being made to teach all this PSHE stuff, and we should be focusing on our actual subjects and teaching those well instead of this stuff, I'd be there with them. I'd be there with them. But of course, they don't care about stuff like that. Yeah, they just seem to choose the wrong battles. And in my experience of being a teacher, like I say, the vast majority of teachers, brilliant, very good. We do have some lazy ones, and I've seen it firsthand. Teachers just abuse the system and be off on sick for 6 months, come back for 2 weeks, be off again.
Yeah. But COVID was a
And the
gift.
unions will defend them. The unions will defend them to the hilt. And I think, why are you defending these people? Because they're undermining the rest of us. And so yeah, I've mixed feelings with it because I think we've got to have them, but yeah, I just think like everything else, they've just been corrupted and infiltrated, and that you've got lots of bad actors operating in them. I think like the NHS, you go to the point of contact, the nurses and the doctors, most of those are decent people, I think. It's everyone around it, and it's the same.
It's turned into a bureaucracy, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
But, but I wanted to just move on just for a little bit. How did you get on during COVID?
Yeah.
You told me one or two things, but
I'll have a swig of beer before I answer. Yeah.
because the COVID was a gift to those lazy types, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It
And
was,
probably to
yeah.
the controlling types as well.
Well, it still is the gift that keeps on giving, especially that test. We've still got people going off with COVID. um, yeah, I mean, I think most staff, when it kicked off in that, was it March 2020? Um, I think most staff were genuinely concerned, thinking, what the hell is this? I think I was lucky that whether it was by chance or by upbringing or by background, that I discovered a bit of knowledge about how things operated. So I smelt a rat straight away. Um, I spoke out against school closures at the time, and I was ridiculed against it. Oh, but it's not safe, and we don't know. And I said, but we know that children aren't at risk. We've got a duty to stay open. And but of course, yeah, I was a lone voice there. Um, and then during that first lockdown, I think most schools like ours were not properly prepared. Um, and so there wasn't really a lot of online teaching went on because the systems weren't set up for that. So we were setting work through homework platforms and through email. But yeah, other than that, and other than monitoring your emails, I went in for odd days. Quite a few staff did go in for odd days because the vulnerable kids were still in school, so we were on a rotation for that. But yeah, it was time off in the sun on full pay.
Yeah.
Um,
Tell me about the
yeah.
masking, Rob. Tell me about the masking. How many
Uh,
editors are wearing masks?
yeah. Well, I think that's where I really stood out because when we returned after, I can't remember it. Was it the first lockdown or the second lockdown? But we were told we had to wear masks, and I wasn't going to wear one. I just I knew it was bullshit, and um, I just for my own self-esteem, I thought I'm not buckling to this. I'm just not going to wear one. And I thought there'd be a few others. I'll never forget that first day that we're back in school and everybody's in a mask,
Yeah.
literally everybody. And to my knowledge, I was the only member of staff not wearing a mask. So I was walking around without a mask. Um, of course, most of the kids are in masks as well. It was one of the darkest feelings I've ever had that day. I had such a dark, dark feeling inside. I can't really explain it, but I just knew this was wrong. It was just wrong. Um, and I thought, this is what real oppression feels like, isn't it? It made me think about those communists living in Eastern Europe in the 1980s and stuff, and just, that drudgery of just oppression. That's the feeling I got from it.
But
Um,
you didn't relent then, and you didn't wear a mask.
no, no, I must admit the first 2 days were challenging because you doubt yourself, don't you? I'm thinking, I've made the wrong call here, have I? But I just knew it was wrong. I just knew it wasn't right. And I thought, I'm not wearing one. I'm not doing it. I probably did have to tell a few white lies at the time. I did have to say, look, I'm exempt. I'm exempt. But after a while, I stopped doing that because I didn't like doing that. And I just said, no, I don't wear one. I choose not to wear one. Um,
Did
and
anybody?
yeah, but
Did
I think
anybody?
what upset the leadership of the school, I think they could tolerate me not wearing one, but when I told them I'm not going to enforce it in my lessons, that didn't go down very well. So in my lessons, obviously I'm not masked up. The kids come in, and of course, you're not wearing a mask, sir. You're not. And I said, no, I choose not to wear one. Can we take it off, sir? And I just used to say the same thing every time. I used to say, look, if you want to wear a mask, that's fine. If you don't want to wear a mask, that's also fine. I'm going to treat you all exactly the same. You've got freedom in my classroom to do as you choose. Okay.
You know what you are, Rob, don't
And
you?
then,
You know what you are.
and
You're
then,
you're the cool teacher.
well, for a short while, I probably was because I wasn't before that. um, yeah, so that probably did get me a little bit of kudos because particularly the naughty kids, straight off. Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this is
The
bullshit, isn't it,
teachers that
sir?
you,
Well,
the,
it's your
the
choice.
teachers,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
teachers that you mostly respect are the ones that you don't like initially.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, after a
yes,
while, oh,
yes.
he's not such a bad bloke after all. Yeah,
Yeah.
so.
Well, I mean, I look back at my school days and those proper teachers that you didn't muck about with. You didn't cross them because you got a serious bollocking.
Yeah.
But when you look back, you realise, yeah, they still allowed free speech in the classroom and they still allowed for failure but they were red hot on good behaviour and good manners. But you don't always realise that when you're a kid, but you do when you look back on it. And they were some of the best teachers in my experience. But of
So
course,
how did it go?
they're a dying breed now, those types.
So how did it go with not making the kids mask up? Then how did you? How did,
Well, in most lessons, about 50% took them off.
okay, but how did you? How was your relationship with the other with your colleagues?
Um, Tricky.
Yeah.
I don't think I was very popular. At that time, I kept a low profile, really. I just went in, did my teaching, and cleared off. But I certainly got some looks from other members of staff when I was walking around without a mask. And
Well, I'm proud of you, man. I'm proud of you.
Um,
Yeah.
but
So
we've still got legacy of that. We've still got probably at our school half a dozen kids still wearing a mask all the time now. And I just think, oh, what have we done to these
yeah.
kids? Damaged
Well,
them forever.
exactly.
Damaged them forever. And another thing that frustrates me is amongst my colleagues that I think a lot of them now recognise the damage that lockdowns did and the school closures did, because you can see it in some
It
people.
must be so obvious with kids, mustn't
Yeah,
it?
and some of them, of course, have had children and they had their GCSEs ruined or their A levels ruined, and they're key milestones in your life, aren't they? To have those ruined. Um, and yeah, I don't think we can quantify the damage that they did, really. I think we're still seeing that. And what frustrates me is that most of my colleagues, I think, will admit that now, the damage that was done. But of course, they went along with it all.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
very little resistance at the time. Very little
Have
resistance.
any of them said,
Well,
Rob, you were right?
I've had one begrudgingly kind of say that. Um, there was a couple of other teachers kind of halfway through, I think, kind of um, sided with me a bit, could see my point. But one guy said, Rob, you've got some balls, you have. Because
I agree. I agree, mate.
I sent a few emails out as well, which uh, stirred a few things up. Yeah, but yeah.
Okay, man. Look,
Uh,
we've got to run out of time now, but it was tremendous talking to you. So,
yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. And yeah,
right, man.
just if someone listening to this, it helps them out, then that's great. Yeah.
Okay, man, because we're about to run out, so I better go.
All the best, Steve.
Okay, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them